Did you ever had that eerie feeling that someone or something was watching you? You're not alone. Before we uncover the terrifying truth, like this video and comment your location. Let's step into the shadows together. I was 23 when it happened, and even now, it sends chills down my spine whenever I think about it. The summer after college graduation, I decided to take a solo road trip across the country, from New York to California. It was supposed to be my last hurrah before entering the real world of 9-to-5 jobs and responsibilities. The first few days were uneventful, filled with the excitement of newfound freedom and the open road. But as I entered the vast, empty stretches of Nevada, things took a turn I never could have anticipated. It was nearing dusk, and I had been driving for hours without seeing another soul. The desert landscape stretched endlessly on either side of the highway, broken only by the occasional scrub brush or rocky outcropping. My eyelids were growing heavy, and I was considering finding a place to pull over for the night when I saw him. A lone figure stood on the side of the road, thumb outstretched. In any other circumstance, I would have driven right past. My parents had drilled into me the dangers of picking up hitchhikers, but something about this man made me slow down. Maybe it was the desperation in his posture, or the fact that I hadn't seen another car for miles. Whatever it was, I found myself pulling over. As I rolled down my window, the man approached. He was older, probably in his 60s, with weathered skin and eyes that seemed to have seen too much. "Where are you headed?" I asked, trying to keep the nervousness out of my voice. "Just up the road a ways," he replied, his voice gravelly and low. "Mind if I hop in?" Against my better judgment, I unlocked the door. The man slid into the passenger seat, and immediately, the temperature in the car seemed to drop several degrees. I suppressed a shiver and pulled back onto the highway. We drove in silence for a few minutes before the man spoke. "You shouldn't be on this road," he said, staring straight ahead. I glanced at him, confused. "What do you mean?" He turned to look at me, and in the fading light, his eyes seemed to glow with an eerie intensity. "This road isn't safe after dark. Strange things happen out here in the desert, things that can't be explained." I laughed nervously, trying to shake off the unease that was creeping up my spine. "Come on, man, you're just trying to scare me." But the old man didn't laugh. Instead, he leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Listen to me, kid. In about 10 miles, you're going to come to a fork in the road. No matter what you see, no matter what you hear, do not take the left fork. You understand me?" Doctor, not take the left fork. The intensity in his voice made me grip the steering wheel tighter. "Why? What's down the left fork?" The old man shook his head. "You don't want to know. Just promise me you'll take the right fork." I nodded, more to appease him than anything else. Okay, right fork, got it." We lapsed into silence again, the only sound the hum of the tires on the asphalt and the whisper of the wind outside. I kept glancing at the odometer, watching the miles tick by. 8 miles, 9 miles. Just as we hit the 10-mile mark, the old man spoke again. "This is my stop. Remember what I said." I slowed the car, pulling over to the side of the road. The man got out without another word, and as I watched him in my rearview mirror, he seemed to vanish into the gathering darkness. Shaking off the encounter, I continued driving. Sure enough, about a half-mile later, I came to a fork in the road. And that's when things got weird. The left fork looked wrong. The air above it seemed to shimmer and distort, like a mirage. And coming from that direction, I could hear something. It wasn't quite music, wasn't quite voices, but it called to me. It promised adventure, excitement, things beyond my wildest dreams. My hands seemed to move of their own accord, turning the wheel towards the left fork. The rational part of my brain screamed at me to stop, to remember the old man's warning. But the pull was so strong. At the last second, I wrenched the wheel to the right, tires squealing as I narrowly made the turn onto the right fork. As I sped away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. For just a moment, I thought I saw something emerging from the left fork. Something huge and dark, with too many limbs and too many eyes. I drove through the night, not stopping until I reached the next town. When I finally pulled into a motel parking lot, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn off the ignition. To this day, I don't know what would have happened if I had taken the left fork. But sometimes, in my dreams, I see that shimmering road, hear that unearthly music, and I wake up in a cold sweat, grateful for the warning of a mysterious old hitchhiker. This story happened when I was 28, and it's the reason I always make sure to book my accommodations in advance now. I was on a business trip, driving from Chicago to Denver for a conference. It was supposed to be a straightforward journey, but a series of delays and wrong turns had me still on the road well past midnight in the middle of nowhere, Nebraska. My eyelids were growing heavy, and the empty road ahead was starting to blur. I knew I needed to find a place to stop for the night, but I hadn't seen any signs of civilization for hours. Just as I was considering pulling over to sleep in my car, I saw a faint glow on the horizon. As I got closer, I could make out a neon sign, "The Last Stop Motel." It looked old and run down, but at that point, I was too exhausted to care. I pulled into the nearly empty parking lot, noticing only one other car, an old station wagon that looked like it hadn't moved in years. The office was dimly lit, and as I pushed open the door, a bell jingled overhead. The smell hit me first, musty and stale, with an underlying scent I couldn't quite place. Behind the counter stood an old woman, her white hair pulled back in a severe bun. She didn't look up as I approached, her eyes fixed on an ancient TV set playing nothing but static. "Excuse me," I said, clearing my throat. "Do you have any rooms available?" Slowly, the woman turned to face me. Her eyes were milky white, and I realized with a start that she was blind. "We always have room," she said, her voice raspy and low. "It'll be $40 for the night, cash only." I hesitated for a moment, but my exhaustion won out. I handed over 2 20s, and in return, she passed me a key attached to a heavy brass keychain. The number 13 was etched into the metal. "Last room on the left," she said, turning back to her static-filled TV. "Enjoy your stay." The hallway to the rooms was dimly lit and seemed to stretch on much further than the size of the building should have allowed. As I walked, I could have sworn the walls were pulsing slightly like a heartbeat. I shook my head, blaming it on my fatigue. Room 13 was at the very end of the hall, the key stuck in the lock, and it took some jiggling before the door finally swung open with a creak. The room was basic, a bed, a nightstand, a small bathroom. But something felt off. The shadows in the corners seemed too deep, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Too tired to care, I collapsed onto the bed fully clothed. As soon as my head hit the pillow, I was out. I woke sometime later to a strange sound, a soft, rhythmic thumping coming from the wall behind the bed. At first, I thought it might be the pipes, but as I became more alert, I realized it sounded more like footsteps, as if someone was pacing in the room next door. I sat up, my heart racing. The digital clock on the nightstand read 3:33 a.m. The footsteps continued, growing louder and more insistent. Then suddenly, they stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A voice, muffled but clear enough to understand. "I know you're awake. Why don't you come join us?" I froze, not daring to move or breathe. The voice came again, closer this time, as if the speaker was right on the other side of the wall. "We've been waiting for you. It's time to check out." Panic overtook me. I leapt from the bed and ran to the door, fumbling with the lock, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. The thumping started again, this time from all around me. The walls, the ceiling, even the floor seemed to vibrate with it. And with each thump, the room grew smaller. The walls were closing in. In desperation, I ran to the window and tried to pry it open. It was then that I realized there was no glass in the window frame. Beyond it was not the parking lot I expected, but an endless void, filled with swirling colors and shapes that hurt my eyes to look at. A hand emerged from the void, reaching for me. It was followed by another and another, dozens of grasping, clawing hands trying to pull me through the window. I screamed and stumbled backward, falling onto the bed. The ceiling was now mere inches from my face, the walls pressing in on all sides. And still, that voice called out, "Join us! Join us! Join us!" Just as I thought I would be crushed, everything stopped. The walls retreated, the hands disappeared, and the thumping ceased. I lay there, gasping for breath, sure that I had finally lost my mind. When I finally gathered the courage to move, I grabbed my things and ran from the room. The hallway was empty and silent. No sign of the pulsing walls or the impossible length I had perceived earlier. The office was empty when I passed through, the old woman nowhere to be seen. As I burst out into the parking lot, the sun was just beginning to rise. I jumped in my car and sped away, not daring to look back. It wasn't until I was miles down the road that I realized something. I still had the room key in my pocket. I pulled over and examined it, my hands shaking. The number 13 was still there, but now there was something else etched into the metal. A date. Today's date. I threw the key as far as I could into a field and drove away, my mind reeling. To this day, I'm not sure what happened in that motel. Was it all a hallucination brought on by exhaustion? Or did I narrowly escape something far more sinister? One thing's for sure, I'll never stay in an unplanned motel again. And if I ever see a sign for the Last Stop Motel, I'll keep driving, no matter how tired I am. I was 32 when this happened, and it's the reason I never ever take shortcuts anymore, no matter how much time they might save. I was driving from Seattle to my sister's wedding in San Francisco. I should have flown, but I had this romantic notion of a scenic coastal drive. Little did I know that this decision would lead me into a nightmare I'm still trying to understand. I was making good time until I hit a massive traffic jam just north of the Oregon-California border. Cars stretched as far as the eye could see, barely moving. As I sat there, inching forward, I noticed a dusty road sign partially hidden by overgrown bushes. Scenic route, 50 miles shorter. Under normal circumstances, I would have ignored it, but I was already running late, and the thought of sitting in traffic for hours was unbearable. So, against my better judgment, I took the exit. At first, the road seemed normal enough. It wound through dense forests, the trees pressing close on either side. But as I drove deeper into the woods, things began to change. The trees seemed to grow taller, their branches reaching over the road like grasping fingers. The sunlight filtering through the leaves took on a sickly green hue. I tried to distract myself by turning on the radio, but all I got was static. Even my cell phone showed no signal. I was completely cut off. As the road continued to wind and twist, I realized I had no idea how long I'd been driving. My watch had stopped, and the car's clock was blinking 12:00, as if it had been reset. The gas gauge, which had been nearly full when I turned off the highway, was now hovering near empty. Panic started to set in. I considered turning back, but I had no idea how far I'd come or how to find my way back to the main road. So I pressed on, hoping to find a town or at least a gas station soon. That's when I saw her. A young woman was standing on the side of the road, her thumb out in the universal sign for hitchhiking. She was pale, with long dark hair that obscured most of her face. Something about her made my skin crawl, but I was desperate for help or at least directions. I slowed down, rolling down my window. "Are you okay?" I called out. "Do you need help?" Slowly, she turned to face me, and that's when I realized why she had seemed so off. Where her eyes should have been, there were only empty, black sockets. I screamed and slammed on the accelerator, but the car sputtered and died. In my rearview mirror, I could see the woman walking towards me, her movements jerky and unnatural. With shaking hands, I tried to restart the car. It coughed and wheezed but wouldn't turn over. The woman was getting closer. I could hear a sound now, a low, guttural moan that seemed to come from all around me. Just as her hand touched the back of the car, the engine roared to life. I floored it, tires squealing as I sped away. But no matter how fast I drove, every time I looked in the rearview mirror, she was there, always the same distance behind me. The road seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning through the endless forest. Day turned to night, then back to day, but still, I drove on. I don't know how long it went on. Hours, days, weeks. Time had lost all meaning. Finally, just as I was about to give up hope, I saw something ahead. A break in the trees, and beyond it, the glimmer of sunlight on water. With a final burst of speed, I broke through the tree line and found myself back on the coastal highway, merging into traffic as if nothing had happened. I pulled over at the first rest stop I saw, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn off the ignition. According to my phone, which was working again, only 2 hours had passed since I'd taken the shortcut, but the car's odometer showed I'd driven over 500 miles. As I sat there, trying to make sense of what had happened, I noticed something in the passenger seat, a single, long, dark hair, and next to it, a small scrap of paper with words scrawled in an unsteady hand. Thanks for the ride. I've never told anyone this story before. Who would believe me? But sometimes, when I'm driving at night, I'll catch a glimpse of something in my rearview mirror, a pale face with empty eye sockets, watching me from the back seat. And I'll hear that low, guttural moan, warning me to never take shortcuts again.